Gonna record. Hello, Calum. I'm so happy to have you here on Rendering Unconscious.
Hi, Vanessa. Lovely to be here.
So, where should we begin?
Um, where should we begin? I guess why I'm here, which is a very good question. So one reason I'm here, and shamelessly, is to plug a book, because I have recently or fairly recently published this book. But I guess that's opens up onto the wider question of why I might be doing this at all. So really, my thing, my um, not sure it's an obsession, but certainly my thing is to try and make Lacan more accessible. So a lot of what I do has been kind of pushing in that direction. So um, and the latest bit of that is writing a book that was supposed to be, well, the original remit I was given by the publishers was to write a book on Lacan for sixth form students. So I don't know if sixth form in UK education means about 18, 19 year olds. So pre-university, which seemed a really odd request because you think how many 18, 19-year-old sixth form students have ever heard of Lacan or would be inclined to pick up a book on Lacan, but that's what they wanted. So essentially a real um, beginner's beginner and entry level text on Lacan. So but for me, this is part of an ongoing um, mission, maybe project mission to I guess kind of lift some of the potentially willful obscurity that shrouds Lacan. And I think for many people there is something, there's a certain jouissance on being inside the club and being the ones who who know, or the ones who suppose themselves to know. And I'm not trying to pretend Lacan is easy to grasp. And I mean, certainly the way Lacan writes isn't straightforward, but I think part of that is the ideas aren't straightforward. But I kind of wanted to believe that that didn't mean they weren't accessible. So I've spent quite a lot of time trying to chip away at that. So um, we're about to publish the fourth volume of the Guide to the Ecrits, which is kind of really part of a similar project, is to try and take Lacan, make Lacan more accessible. So what we've essentially done there is take the entire Ecrit and make it into an accessible or a more accessible text. And the idea with the Ecrit books is, you know, not that it replaces the Ecrit, but that it's something that people can sit and read side by side by the Ecrit. And then, so it's not making Lacan accessible, it's making the Ecrit itself accessible, because you can read the Ecrit and when you get stuck, and I think everyone, when they're reading the Ecrit, gets stuck, but there's someone else's commentary you can turn to. So it's designed as a paragraph by paragraph commentary so that you can read it in that parallel fashion, not necessarily text to be read from beginning to end on their own, but to be read in parallel with the original. Whereas the basics book that I've just published is a slightly different thing. That's designed very much to be read on its own. So it's for people who, it's really is aimed at people who've not read Lacan rather than people who've read Lacan and found it too difficult, too challenging. It's meant to be an invitation into um, the Lacanian world. Um, Whether or not it works, I don't know.
Well, it sounds wonderful. I don't have that book yet, but I have the three books, which I have here. So the one that's coming out is the yellow one.
Yeah, so there's a
Okay,
yellow one.
because I saw this on your email and I was like, wait, why don't I have that yellow one?
The yellow one will be with us in about 3 weeks.
Okay, good. So I will have it soon. And then you all have to come on and we can talk about it. And I still want to do a series where I started the series with Todd McGowan, I think back in like 2019 on signification with the phallus. And I wanted to go piece by piece and interview all of these authors that contributed, but it was the pandemic and it was really hard to nail people down. I think everyone was just too stressed out. So maybe now will be a better time to embark on that endeavor.
But once you have the yellow one, you can reorder them because they actually came out in backwards order. So the
Oh,
yellow one is actually um the first eight Ecrits. So you can relaunch um your series starting
from the beginning.
from the overture and then take us right through the Ecrit.
Okay, perfect. I love this.
And the
I'm into
overture,
it.
the first Ecrit in the book is the commentary was myself, Derek, and Stain. So
Oh,
the
perfect.
one to start with.
So you can help me launch this.
Yeah.
Wonderful, because we are kindred spirits, and that my mission is also to make psychoanalysis in general more accessible to people, and Lacan in particular. Because I think that even though, people say Lacan's so hard to read, and I think the Lacree is much more difficult than the seminars. The seminars, though, I also like, I'm not this type of reader that has to understand every single word that's happening. I just like to read it and get the experience. And I feel like the experience of like reading, especially the seminars, is just kind of like analysis in a way, like puts you in this state where you're like, wait, where are we going? And then you like get to this point where you're like, aha, I see what he's saying. And then you're like back in this muck again. So that's what I really like about him. And I think that's why he resonates so much. And I feel like trying to nail down exactly what's going on at any given point. People can do that if they want. That's wonderful for scholars. But as a clinician, I feel like for me, it's more about the experience. And I feel like if more people just like relaxed a little and just read it and didn't worry so much about what they don't know or understand, then yeah, people could get a lot more out of it. And I'm sure your basics book would really help people kind of, like you said, whet their appetite or understand the basic concepts before they leap into Lacan himself.
Yeah, I mean that's the plan. I mean, I agree with you with the seminars. I think often as you read the seminars, you get the sense that Lacan himself doesn't know where he's going. He's free
Exactly.
and he kind of wanders around and he gets back to his point or he gets to another point. And yeah, you get the sense that it's like theatre. It's like, reading Beckett. Yeah, if you read Beckett's plays, yes, you can read them. And, I've read lots of Beckett plays and it's very valuable to sit and read them. But really, you need to hear them or, you need to go to the theatre and experience them. And I think the same is with Lacan's seminars. You know, I don't think anything could repeat the experience of being there in the room with Lacan, smelling his cigars and listening to him and watching him wander through this discourse. And when you sit down to read it, you're getting a secondary experience, but they're not written works. I know that the English, well, the officially published translations are, have been worked over by Miller, but um, if you read the Cormac Gallagher translations, which is the way I read most of the seminars because they weren't available in English translation until more recently. And there you're getting very raw Lacan. And as you say, you just have to kind of go with that. You kind of got to read it and let it flow over you and pull things out as you go. Whereas the Ecrit, I think, is a different beast. I think the Ecrit is so carefully and densely written that's what makes it much more challenging and in a way much more exciting to read because I think it's not a mistake that Lacan begins the Ecrit um, with a detective story, and it's he's inviting you um, to investigate, to interpret, and to figure out. And the essays in the Ecrit are so dense and so full of allusions and references, and you know, Lacan doesn't reference very well in the way we kind of think of referencing as academics, but it's full of these allusions and connections. You need to spend a long time um, discovering and following, and that's what our commentaries do. They do a lot of that work of following these leads and these associations and unpacking things, but they're not definitive in that regard. I mean, I really would hope nobody picks up our commentaries and thinks, okay, this is it. I have the answer to the
Yeah,
Ecrit.
but they're really good. They're
No,
really
they are
helpful.
they're, they're brilliant. They're really helpful, but I think that I want to see them also as an invitation, like, look, this can be done, and you can follow that, and we're following that ourselves. We're now launching the Ultra Écrit, so the other volume of Lacan's essays. So that will be the next project. So we have literally invited lots of people to say that we've managed to do this with the Écrit. Come and join us, and we'll do it with the Ultra Écrit as well.
Amazing. Well, bless you guys. More power to you, because that is a task. That is a huge task. But I love it. And you definitely have to come on to talk about it. I was in a Lacan like study group, reading group for like about 5 years in New York. And I think we read One Piece for like a year and a half, like just like stopping and talking on like every sentence
One piece from our book or from the
from the Cree. It
yeah.
was a psychoanalytic act.
Yeah, no, it's yeah, I mean, they take a long time to read, and that's why it took us 10 years to do the series, because these are not quick commentaries. They take serious dedication for people um to unpack them, and they're dense as well. I mean, even our versions are dense because we're limited by publishers um restrictions. I mean, we initially intended to do the Écrit in 3 volumes, but it ended up being 4 volumes. But even so, it's still very dense, because some of the Écrits are very, very long, and even the ones that aren't so long are very dense. So they require a lot of unpacking.
Exactly. It's great. It's wonderful. And you also do Lacan in Scotland.
Yes, which again is really part of the same agenda of trying to make Lacan accessible. Lacan in Scotland started off as it started off literally in Scotland, and I think the first Lacan in Scotland we did, and possibly even before we came up with the name Lacan in Scotland, was 3 people, and a speaker in the room with 3 people in the audience, and we just kept doing it, and it grew from there. So before COVID, we were beginning to get audiences of in excess of 100 people coming along, and given there is no kind of Lacanian tradition in Scotland. There, at the time we started doing Lacan in Scotland, the joke that people would often make is, "I am Lacan in Scotland because I was the only Lacanian in Scotland." There were no practitioners. I'm not an analyst. I'm an academic, but I'm an academic who has focused very much on Lacan and his works and related stuff.
And you were in psychoanalysis.
I have been in psychoanalysis, yes, but not in Scotland. Well, no, I have been in Scotland, but not the Lacanian in Scotland. Um, but yeah, so when I started, it was very much just me and some interested students, but we just kept going. It was kind of like Field of Dreams, build it and they will come. And we just kept running these sessions with 3 people in the audience, 7 people in the audience, and then over a few years, it grew to. I think the last one we did, we had 130 people in the audience. So,
Wow.
um, and these were just people who were interested. They weren't Lacanians. There were some people who had read a bit of Lacan or tried to read a bit of Lacan. Some people who were in practitioners, but not Lacanian practitioners. So people interested in psychodynamic counseling, that kind of thing, or people interested in cultural applications of theory. So people would just um, roll up. So it was quite an amazing thing to do. But then um, COVID struck and we had to stop, and we just stopped completely. And it was about a year later, so I think it was 2020. We decided, okay, we haven't done anything for a year. It doesn't look like it's going to be possible quite yet, because in Scotland at that point, I think we were allowed to to see other people, but we still had to keep 2 meters distance, and there were all kind of restrictions in place. So holding live events was still a real challenge. So we thought, well, we've got used to this new technology of doing Zoom things, so let's try doing an online session. And we've been doing it every month since. So we do it the last Thursday of every month. We have a live seminar, invited speakers, and we keep the format really simple. But it's grown enormously through being online. So we now, the audience has changed. When we were doing it at Edinburgh, as I say, it was more curious passers-by. Now we tend to get a much more solid um, Lacanian audience, but it's still a really varied audience, and we try and keep it um, reasonably accessible in terms of pitch. So there's generally quite a few students in the audience, um, but also analysts, academics, and hopefully still curious passerbys as well. Um, so the audience has grown, and we post things on YouTube as well. So the audience through that grows even further. So we're reaching out, hopefully getting to people, and we try and cover interesting ideas so that it appeals to people outside the Lacanian world as well. Um,
Yeah, exactly. You have fun topics. That's how I get people in. I'm like, let's talk about film or magic. And people are like, okay. And I'm like, and now this is psychoanalysis.
Absolutely, yeah, but that works. I mean, people
It
are
works
into
really well.
film, sex, death. I mean, these things seem to capture people's
The
imagination.
occult.
Yeah, we haven't done the occult much. We need to have you in Lacan in Scotland to talk about the occult.
Okay. I also have my art book. We can do all sorts of things. I can talk about occult artists.
Yep, that sounds fantastic.
Mix it all together.
Yeah, no, I'll hold you to that for sure.
Okay. Can make a new book. It'll be fun. No, but I found when you present the ideas without using the jargon, then people get them because people are also living in their psyches, you know? So so they're like, "Oh yeah, that makes sense. Oh yeah, I do that. Oh, I see how that works because yeah, we're all living it." So,
Well, that's it. If you can only present it in the jargon, it becomes a closed loop. Um, and at some point, I think, got to ask yourself, okay, what's the value here? Because we're just working within this closed bubble, and it doesn't seem to relate to anything else. Um, so, to me, it seems really important to step outside that. My first experience of Lacan was as a student myself, and I joined this class. I was doing a master's in critical theory, and I joined. Everyone else in the class had already been there for a year, and I joined, so a year into a 2 year course, and I tried to read a little bit of Lacan, but I hadn't gone there to study Lacan, so I wasn't immersed in Lacan. And I sat in this class with people using all this Lacanian terminology, and I just I had no idea what people were talking about, and I soon began to suspect that neither did they, that they were just using um, these terms and kind of flinging terms around the room, jouissance and objet pitié, and I had no idea what they were all talking about. And I think that kind of was the seeds of my desire to actually make something accessible out of Lacan, to write something that people could read and understand without having been um, already immersed in it, without having to, first of all, having to learn the language, learn the application first, and then you see where the language fits in. And I think the language is really important to Lacan. I think he's very careful in how he uses language, and there are reasons he uses particular terms over other terms, and some of the terms might seem quite confounding, and I think it's precisely that there is a good reason for using them. But I think sometimes you have to step back from that, at least initially, before you can get into it. And then, it's later you start to appreciate why that particular term is used. But I think when people just use the terms without stepping back from them, then it becomes a kind of an in-group jargon, as you say, an in-group vocabulary that's it kind of it stops us going underneath and digging down and thinking, well, what does this really mean? I mean, if you take for a really good example from Lacan with the phallus, Lacan's really clear when he uses the term phallus that he's not talking about um, a piece of flesh, a bit of biology, a penis. And yet, why does he choose the word phallus, which obviously connects to that? And yeah, people never really seem to to question that. They just, people in the Lacanian world just use the term phallus. And if you say, well, why phallus? You get all kinds of different answers, and it's almost like, or no answer at all. And I think, things like that, just kind of stopping and thinking, why this first before we start just to use this term repeatedly, I think really helps to understand what it is you're trying to say. And ultimately, all these conversations we have, the books we write, the books we read, it's all communication. But if it's not communicating anything, then it's not communication.
Yeah, absolutely. Because I frequently have wondered throughout my psychoanalytic life, like, how did psychoanalysis become so inaccessible? And I think this is exactly the problem, is not only like people complaining, oh, it's frequency and cost, but you can do sliding scale and alleviate that for people so more people can be seen. But it's also this kind of attitude where like the analysts or the analytic community is actually basically buying their own bullshit or assuming the position of the subject supposed to know. It's like we're supposed to all know that we're not supposed to assume that position ourselves. Like we may be put in that position, but we should try to subvert that a bit, step out. And not, yeah, not be like, yeah, I do know, because then we're no different than psychologists that are like, oh yes, let me tell you what to do with your life and give you all of this advice so that you can be, or an ego psychologist, you can be a healthy person like me.
Well, exactly. Yeah. I mean, there seems to be something very un-Lacanian in that approach. I think if you're going to be a Lacanian practitioner, whether that practice is analysis or simply writing or speaking or teaching, you know, you've got to be Lacanian to be a Lacanian. So to me, that means questioning things. That's what Lacan did. Lacan's return to Freud is all about, to me anyway, it's about that Freudian spirit of constantly moving forward and questioning things. And we were talking a little bit earlier about the complete Freud, and what you see through those books is, Freud constantly pulling apart his own assumptions, his own arguments, and rethinking his approach to things. And I think that's what Lacan is really driving at when he has a return to Freud. He's like, let's not. The aim of this is not to come up with a solid edifice. The aim of this is to keep moving forward and keep questioning. And you see that through Lacan's work as well. Then, from the 1940s, 1930s, onward into the 1970s, he's constantly rethinking his ideas, pushing forward, going back, going forward, and we need to do that as well. And if we just accept the language of Freud or just accept the language of Lacan and see it as this completed package, then we're losing that spirit. We may be true to the letter, but we're not true to the spirit. And I think we need to be true to the spirit as well as the letter.
I wholeheartedly agree. Now we also have to talk about coil and hypnosis.
Yeah, no, look at from maybe we should contextualize this for everyone else. It was some years ago, a few 3 or 4 years ago. I I mentioned the band Coil, and for people who don't know, Coil are an electronic band in the. You probably know this better than me, Vanessa. 80s Coil started, yeah, late
Yeah,
80s, yeah.
1982.
Oh, early 80s. Okay, so
Yeah,
you know.
84. Psychic TV started in 1982. And coil started in 84. Something like that.
Okay.
Early 80s.
Um, but they're my favorite Coil records is a record called Horse Rotivator, and it's a very, very difficult record to actually get hold of physically. So I say it's my favorite, but I listen to it as on MP3s. And Vanessa, although we've never actually met in reality and never really spoken, I don't think until today, very generously sent me a copy of Horse Rotivator. So we have a long distance bond in Coil and related music.
Exactly. I had two. So I don't need two LPs of the same LP. So I thought I would share because I'm also passionate about sharing music and things like that. And before I was a psychoanalyst, I would be like, oh, you haven't heard of Coil? And I would burn people like CDs, tons of MP3s of Coil and be like, here, listen to this, you know?
Yeah, no, absolutely. What is music if not to be shared? But it was incredibly generous of you, and it's a fantastic record.
Good. I'm glad you're enjoying it. And I haven't got to see the Hypnosis film yet. It's not available here. I looked it up. It's not available here till March 4th. So I'm waiting to find out. Peter Christopherson, who was in Coil, just for context, was in Hypnosis or involved in Hypnosis. And I haven't got to see the film yet, but I love all of Anton Corbijn's films, so I'm sure it's epic as usual.
Yeah, and it's a fantastic film. I mean, it's very dominated by Pink Floyd um, rather than Coil and that kind of later work. But it's a great film. Um, again, for the audience who don't know, Hypnosis was the name of the company that designed um, artwork, most famously for Pink Floyd, "Wish You Were Here" and "Dark Side of the Moon," I guess, is the most famous one. So it's the company who designed the artwork, and one of the three people in Hypnosis went on later to form. He was in Throbbing Gristle, wasn't he? Yeah, so
Yeah, he was in Throbbing Gristle. That's how he started. And then, so first it was Genesis Peerage and Cozy Fanny Tutti and Coombe. And then they decided to make this kind of music accompaniment to their performance art collective. And so then they had Peter Christopherson. Peter Christopherson joined Coombe actually early on also. And then they made Throbbing Gristle as part of Coombe with Chris Carter also. And then they kind of went in that direction and just became this like experimental industrial band, Throbbing Gristle. And then they broke up because romantic relationships didn't work out, basically. And then they kind of split off, and Chris and Cozy became Chris and Cozy, and Peter Christopherson and Genesis became Psychic TV with early members like John Balance. And then again, they had another little falling out split, and so then Genesis went off with Psychic TV, and Peter Christopherson and John Balance formed Coil. And yeah, I have a new book out called Things Happen, which is actually a Coil song. The title comes from a Coil song called Things Happen. And in the book, the lyrics of that particular song are by Little Annie Bandes, also known as Annie Anxiety, who was in Crass and then worked with all sorts of different people in that kind of experimental era. And in the book, you actually read the lyrics to the song so that the beginning of the book has the first line of the song, and the last line of the book is the last line of the song because I was so obsessed with that song when I was a teenager. So when I got to meet little Annie because my husband Carl is friends with Michael Girard from Swans, and Swans came through Stockholm, so Carl went, and then little Annie was opening for Swans, and my first book, which was a book of cut-up poetry, had just come out, so Carl gave it to little Annie because he knew I was like a huge fan, and then they were just like chatting, and she had just moved to Miami and didn't know anyone there. Because she's from New York, and then Carl's like, "Oh, my wife is from Miami." And then it was in the interim period where I was like, I had left New York, but I couldn't move to Sweden yet because Sweden originally rejected my residency, even though I was married to a Swede. That's a whole other thing. But anyway, there was a period of like a year and a half where I was basically like floating around and didn't really have a place to live. And I was in Miami a lot of the time, like staying with my parents and things. And so Annie had just moved there. And so I was like, okay, so great. I'll just show little Annie around. So I get to like hang out with her. And then one night we got drunk and I joked to her, I was like, I listen to your music so much, specifically this song, Things Happen. When I was like a teenager, I was like, it's just so funny that you're here. And she's like, maybe that's how I got here. It's like, I have no idea why I'm in Miami. Like maybe you like made a little portal and like brought me here. I was like, maybe because artists, these magical artists are all like that. But of course, in reality, her husband retired and they retired in Florida because that's what people do. But it's a fun story.
that's fantastic. I have a rather more mundane um, crass story myself. I used to live in Romania, and I'd heard of Crass. This was in the kind of early 90s. I'd heard of Crass, but I'd never actually heard their music. And in northeast Romania, of all places, I stumbled across this Crass tape. And most of the music that you'd find you could buy there was things like Ace of Base and Europop stuff, and then in amongst all this was this crass tape, so I had to buy it, and I took it home and I played it, and it was in yeah, it's quite noisy, dissonant music, and my crass tape I played it a few times and then it disappeared, and I had no idea what happened to this in my own house. It just like disappeared, and my girlfriend at the time had claimed to have no idea about what happened to this. So the only conclusion was that this was my girlfriend's story. The cleaner must have taken it. I was working at a university there, so I lived in university property. So this cleaner from the university would come once a week and clean the apartment. So the cleaner must have taken it. I had this like crazy idea. This cleaner kind of stumbling across this crash tape and think I must have that of all things in this flat. I must steal the crash tapes. But I suspect that's not what actually happened to my crash tape.
Maybe she thought it was too noisy.
I think it
She
was
threw
really
it out.
that's my crash story.
I love it. Well, Annie was married to Steve Ignorant from Crass, and that's how she ended up in Crass. She met him in New York, like just like literally, he just like walked down the street and was like, "Oh, who are you?" And then she ended up moving to England with him, even though she was like 18 or 19 or something at the time, and ended up living with them for a long time. Yeah, so it's fun. I sent you my book, right? Did I send you this book about all these artists? Because I feel like you would love it. You might be the only analyst that understands it.
Yes, you did.
Okay,
Yeah,
good. I thought I did, but I wanted to make sure
yeah, no,
because
you did.
there aren't so
It's very
many.
good. I think I wrote an endorsement for it. So
Yes, exactly. Okay, I thought so. Good. Yeah, because I think you're the only one that would actually understand what I'm talking about in this book.
I hope not. I find it really enjoyable, and I think everyone needs to read it. So
Oh, thank you. I made an error in my judgment though because I put the word scansion in the title, and I totally wrote this book for people that like Coil and Throb and Gristle and all these kinds of things, not for analysts, because I don't think most analysts, maybe now, maybe they'll like more of these things, but the generation ahead of me, not so much. But then I put this word scansion in the title, and then it scares them away because they don't know what that is. And to me, I didn't even think about it. I like purposely wrote the whole book without jargon so that it would be accessible in this way that we're talking about.
and then you
And then I put this
jargonize the
jargon
title.
term right in the title just to scare everyone off.
So that's you're unconscious at work there, yeah?
Yeah, exactly. Because also in psychoanalysis, in Lacanian psychoanalysis, scansion is like so basic that I didn't even think of it as a jargon word, but it totally is, of course. So,
So we need to work
oops.
to get it out to the true audience.
Yeah, we really do. I think it's getting out there more, and maybe my Things Happen book will help also because it's kind of it's a cut up novel. Like I made it through making cut ups and the
Okay.
like William Burroughs style. Like I wrote down all these kind of scenes that I wanted to include in the book, and some that I had written down like when I left Florida in 2007. Then in 2008, once I got away from Miami, I kind of it came to me through like hanging out at a bar with people like after work. I was working at a student counseling center for my postdoc, and then like making friends that way. And then you have a couple beers and start sharing little like life stories, and then like other people would be like, wow, that's really fucked up, or like, oh wow, that's really wild. And I was like, is it? And I was like, it's just Miami's just like that. And then I'm like, are these stories like really out there? And then I hear other people's stories, and I'm like, wow, I think my stories are really out there. And so I started writing some of them down just so I would remember. And then I kind of took these old stories that I wrote down and wrote down some new ones. I wrote down some dreams too and things like that. And then I literally just like cut them up and like threw them around the house and like pasted them back together and then like rewrote the narrative that way. It was a really fun process. So it's kind of
That
like the
sounds
process I
amazing.
talk about in the book.
Okay. I need to look out for that too.
Yeah, it just came out literally a week ago.
Okay.
It's brand new. It's if you want to read about the wild goth underground of the 90s in Miami, then it's the book for you.
Okay. That sounds very interesting to me.
And it
Yes.
has my Coil origin story of how I discovered Coil in it too.
Okay. Cool.
Fun. I don't know if analysts are allowed to write books like that, but I did.
I think more analysts should write books like that. More
I
analysts should
did.
have coil origin stories as well.
Yeah, I might be the only one.
Yeah, you may well. I don't know what my Coil origin story is. I can have no recollection of how I encountered Coil. I think it was through Horse Rotivator. Actually, I think I do through a friend at school. I think is how I originally encountered that album. But for a long time, that was the only Coil I knew. I didn't, the rest of Coil weren't particularly on my radar. Apart from the cover version of um,
Tainted Love.
Tainted Love.
That was my first. I think Horse Rotivator is a good introduction. It's a good like intro to Coil album because some of their stuff gets a little like weirder. That's like a pretty, it's got like some like songs that are like real songs and then mixed in with some more experimental stuff. So it's good. But yeah, my first was the Panic Tainted Love split. And then when I heard that Tainted Love song, I was like, what is this? Like who would sing this song this way? But of course, if you listen to the lyrics, like it's pretty upsetting, if you actually like hear what he's saying in the lyrics. And then they paired it with the song Panic, and then they dedicated all the funds that they raised from that album went to AIDS research. I was just like, who are these people? Who would do such a thing? That's amazing. I love them. And yeah, it's just like with psychoanalysis for me. It's like when you find something that's like it opened like my worldview because Miami is very like, Gloria Stefan and like, that kind of pop music. And it was just like not for me. So when I found that, I was like, oh wait, there are others, I had to like find these others. And now like, yeah, now I'm like friends with all their friends and have met their like ex-lovers and all sorts of stuff. It's pretty fun.
Yeah, you don't really associate Miami with goth.
No, but it did have a good underground goth scene, thankfully. I mean, it was really a blessing. And I'm still, there's this club that was like the club that was our home away from home called the Kitchen Club. And I'm still friends with the owner on Facebook, of course. But it's like I've told him, like one of our friends that was a regular there was killed a couple of years ago and by her boyfriend because domestic violence is terrible and fuck guns. But anyway, through that, I was talking to him a lot more, and I told him like it's so important that people open these spaces, especially for like teenagers, because not everyone has a great home life, and like people need a place to go. And he did like a lot of all ages nights before the club would open officially, like do punk shows and stuff. There were like all ages shows, and they were like, they were really a lifeline at that time. So like those kinds of spaces and spaces for queer kids, these kinds of things are really important. Yeah, and I just think they're great. And then we also had, in Fort Lauderdale, Marilyn Manson was a local band at the time, in the early 90s. So like I had one friend who was a couple years older than me that had a car, and she always wanted to go see, they were called Marilyn Manson and the Spooky Kids at the time. And she always wanted to go see them. And they played for like $2, So they were always playing like every weekend. And she used to always drive us up to Fort Lauderdale to go see them. And they were really fun. They were like, they had like rainbow striped tights and like, rainbow like ribbons in their hair and braids and like wore like they were much more like Dr. Seuss like kind of costumes and things. They were like much more like kind of yeah like Dr. Seuss spooky psychedelic at that time. And they got kind of more like I don't know dark and mainstream when they got popular or whatever. But it was fun to have those kinds of things. And it was good that there was this like we call it tropic goth. It's like a tropical goth scene.
Yeah, no, it was big here. The thing here about goth is everybody looked like goths but denied being goths. That's um, certainly in the 80s. Everyone's like, no, I was never a goth, but you kind of dressed in black and a hair full of hairspray. But I know I'm not a goth. I'm not a goth. So I think officially there were no goths in Edinburgh, but there were actually hundreds.
Yeah, I was definitely goth. I probably still am, but I never wore so much makeup. Like I never like painted my face white and like did my eyes with like, long things or anything. But my friend Jessica, who was killed, I dedicate the book to her and little Annie. She did that, like with the lines around her eyes and everything, and like painted like designs and like had her hair done and things. I'm just kind of too lazy for that. I'm like eyeliner, mascara, maybe lipstick. That's it for me. I've never like put that much into my appearance in that way. But I remember also like a friend's boyfriend had a mohawk and like having to sit there for like hours with gel trying to get his mohawk to stand up perfectly. I was like, is this really punk? Like it's taking us like 3 or 4 hours to get this guy's mohawk perfect, like to go out to the club. Like, is that really punk rock? But I guess and now we know like it is. So it's really fashion.
Yeah. I wonder if how many, or at least your younger audience understand what you're talking about when you talk about hair gel. There's a fantastic, do you know, you must know Nausberg, the Norwegian writer, yeah? And I think it's in My Struggle or one of the early books of the series. He's talking about hair gel, like walking in the rain and the hair gel running down his face and into his eyes. And it's like an immediate resonance when I'm reading that. But I think younger readers will have no idea. Like, all these things have improved so much. But back in the 80s, hair gel came in day glow colors and you know, would go rock solid until you went out to the rain, which living in Edinburgh, it rains a lot. And then it would all just like bleed down your face and into your eyes. The
Fun, good
hardship of being a
times.
goth.
Yeah, I don't know. Is goth dead since Hot Topic? I think so. I know a lot of kids and teenagers look like that, but I don't think it's quite the same
No.
when you can buy it at Hot Topic. We like actually had to buy our black lipstick during Halloween because you could not buy black lipstick the rest of the year. So we would like during Halloween like stock up on the black lipstick, you know.
We've discovered the goth psychoanalysis continuum.
Yeah, I had my friend Cadmus on the podcast recently, and he's a philosopher, but he's also like very pagan. And he's written a book that talks about basically like how to do philosophy, like how it's been impossible to have like more of a pagan worldview because everything is so monotheist in the West that it's like even if you don't subscribe to any monotheism in particular, you can't really get out of it. You know, it's just like how we think. And so he's like written a book about philosophy and like how to think more like in this like pagan way where everything is kind of multiple and this multiplicity. And I think people would like it because with all like everything that's going on and people being able to be like they, them and have multiple identities within one person and this kind of thing, it makes a lot of sense. So I actually think my next project will be working towards a pagan psychoanalysis. See how that goes.
Yeah, I mean that sounds really important. You're absolutely right. It's I read something fairly recently about statistics in the UK, and it was the percentage of people who um, declare an affinity with religion, and it's less than half now. I think the point in the article is it's the first time it's been less than half. So religion is really on the demise, but we are still structurally we're Christians, whether we have the belief or not. I mean,
Exactly.
I'm in Scotland. I was brought up, you know, well, I was brought up Calvinist basically, and I'm not a believer. I'm not, don't consider myself a Christian, but that structure is in me. So the way I think about religious issues and and much more than religious issues is always already Calvinist, and it's really hard to unthink that and to go beyond that. Because even when you try and step outside that, which I clearly do in my writing, my work, my teaching, but I'm still stepping outside that from that. So it's still there as a foundation.
Mhm.
So yeah, I think if your friend can think ways of helping us to actually work from outside that, that's really valuable because we're locked in it otherwise.
Yeah. I'll send you a link to his book. I don't know where it is on my shelf, so I can't pull it out like the others, but I'll send you a link because he just his sold that the first edition sold out and they just published a new edition. It's good. It's called True to the Earth Pagan Political Theory.
No, it sounds interesting. I don't know much about paganism, so I'd be doubly interested.
It's fun. He's great. I love Cadmus. Is there anything else you wanted to mention that we didn't get to? Any other events or books or anything happening that you want to
Um,
mention?
it depends when this goes out, but we're doing a launch for the Ecrits book. So the final one, the yellow volume of the Reading the Ecrits book, which will be in March the 14th. It'll be on Lacan'S in Scotland, so it's a virtual event, and the
Perfect.
whole world is invited. if
Oh,
Zoom can
good.
handle it.
So I'll make sure this comes out before then. I can bump you up if I need to. It's my
That would be
podcast.
fantastic. Yeah, and please come along yourself. It'd be great to have you there.
Okay, that
So
sounds
it's
good.
good. We're
It's a
going to
date.
try and get um, as many of the contributors to all four books there as well. So
Ooh,
it's going to be slightly different to your usual Lacan in Scotland. We're just going to ask people to do shorts, interventions, but we're hoping. I mean, I'd love to get everyone to. That's in total, I think about 40 writers. I don't think we'll get everyone, but we'll try and get as many as we can.
that's very enticing. I will definitely be there. And so will
Brilliant.
all of you listening.
Yes.
Well, good. Well, it was lovely to chat with you, Callum.
It's fantastic to eventually meet you and chat, and I'll hold you to coming on Lacan in Scotland. We're booked up for the rest of this academic year, but in the fall we'll get you on.
That's perfect because I'm going to New York in May to speak at this conference at Columbia University on Otto Rank. And so I'm talking about Otto Rank and his theories of the art and artist. And I'm using this Danish artist that I'm kind of obsessed with, Overtachi. She's like an early trans artist who lived in a mental asylum for like 52 years. And yeah, her work is just incredible. I got to, when I went to, actually, I only left Sweden twice last year, and it was to drive to Hamburg to visit little Annie both times. She was playing there, and both times I was like, well, that's only whatever, 7 hour, 9 hour drive or something. I'll just drive down. And so I did that. And on the second trip where I went in November, which was actually the day after I finished my book, I went to the Overtachi Museum in Denmark. And wow, seeing her work in person is like mind-blowingly incredible. And she even like painted the bed that she slept in. And like she had all these like murals she wanted to paint in her room. Because they actually, even though she was interned in the psychiatric hospital, they allowed her to not be medicated as long as she like wasn't violent and things like that. And so as long as she could make her art, she wasn't, you know. So they just let her like make all this art, but she wasn't allowed to paint on the walls. So instead, she like designed all these murals the way she wanted them. And so in the museum, they like painted the murals the way she wanted them for in the museum at least, which is really lovely. And since she couldn't paint on the walls, she like started making these big like life-size paper dolls, like paper mache dolls, and she would like hang them from hooks in the ceiling. And so they were like all of her friends that she would like interact with, and like who knows what she was doing in her fairy tale world that she created for herself. But I just like love it so much. It was so great. So I'm going to talk about her art through the theories of Otto Rank, which the person invited me because he read some piece I wrote about art and artists and said like, oh, your ideas are really similar to Rank. So now that I'm reading a lot of Rank, I'm like, wow, they are really similar, and he's like really good. So yeah, so I'll be doing that in May. So that'll be like my whole brain is taken up by that till May. So the fall for Lacan in Scotland is perfect.
Brilliant. We'll see you there.
All right, bye.
Brilliant. Thanks, Vanessa. Take care.
You too.